I'm Jolene Wynn, and this is the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, episode number 201, If You Don't Want to Get Your Hopes Up. Hello, my lady. If you have a spouse that is struggling with a pornography problem, then you are in the right place. My name is Jolene Wynn, and I am a life coach, a member of the LDS faith, and the wife of a former porn addict. And in this podcast, I am going to teach you how to change the way that you are affected by your husband's choices. We can't change him, but what we can do is change the way that you respond when he makes the decisions that he does. I'm going to teach you how to manage your brain, how to process all of the emotions that seem so overwhelming to you so that you can finally live a life where you aren't living in fear of triggers and relapses. And by learning how to manage your mind and process your emotions, you are no longer going to be running on an emotional roller coaster, but you are going to start feeling so much more in control of your life no matter what your husband is doing. And I'm going to teach you all of that on this podcast. I can't wait to get started with you, and I'm so glad that you are here. I promise you, you're in the right place. Hello, my ladies. I am so happy to be talking to you today. I am finally starting to feel a little better. I had a friend of mine ask me yesterday, she was like, how are you after having the Black Plague? And I was like, I am starting to feel better. I'm about 80% energy, which feels great. And I have a voice again, which I know you guys know I've been having a speaking voice, but I was worried about not having a singing voice because even as of a few days ago, I didn't have it, which is totally fine and not a problem, except that yesterday was Palm Sunday and a friend of mine asked if we would sing. She had, you guys, the most beautiful musical celebration that I have ever been to. It was something she just wanted to put on herself, and we had it at our church. So last night, we were able to go to our church and spend a whole hour. There was just an hour of music. It was just different people sharing their musical talents, and it was beautiful. And Christy and I got to sing, my sister and I. It was so fun. My friend played the violin with us. My sister played the piano. It was so beautiful and just a great way to spend Palm Sunday. And I was just so grateful that I had a voice and I was able to sing because I've been singing since I was a kid and took voice lessons all growing up. I went to a performing arts high school. It's very High School Musical. I don't know if you guys have seen that. I actually haven't seen High School Musical except for the bits and pieces that my kids have seen that I've walked in when my kids were watching it. But very High School Musical, that was my high school. And so I've been singing, and music is a big part of my life. You guys know I love Christian music. And so it was just so powerful and just a beautiful way to spend Palm Sunday. So I was very grateful for that. And I am so excited to talk to you guys today because it's a little bit inspired by Palm Sunday. And I'm going to kind of talk about the connection between what we're talking about today and Palm Sunday at the end of the episode. But a few things that I wanted to hit on the calendar first will be very fast. Number one, ladies, I'm going on tour. That's what I'm calling it anyway. I'm going on tour over the next couple of months, and I want to meet you. I am traveling a bunch over the next few months. I'm going to be in Texas for the solar eclipse. I am going to be in Idaho and Utah at various points, and I want to meet up with you guys. And so I'm going to be sending out an email. So get on my email list because I'm going to be sending out an email with the dates that I'm going to be on tour and where. And I just want to meet up for lunch. I'm just going to let you guys know that I'll be having lunch somewhere and asking for an RSVP so that I know who to expect, how big of a place, like if I need to reserve tables and things. So keep an eye out. But for those of you who are listening, if you are Texans, I am going to be in the Dallas area, and I'm going to be having lunch in Frisco. My brother lives in Frisco. So the Frisco area on April 10th, Wednesday, April 10th, I'm having lunch in Dallas, Texas, Frisco, Texas. If you live in the area and you want to come have lunch with me, I would absolutely love it. My brother lives there, and he said he will recommend a place for us that's delicious. So I will be sending out emails just so that so you can RSVP. So get on my email list. You can also email me, coach@jolenewynn.com. Let me know that you want to come join me for lunch, and I'll make sure that we do that. So I'm going on tour. Make sure you guys look out for those tour dates. Second thing, I am doing Coach Week next week. I am so excited. I feel like I haven't coached you guys in so long, even though we did one in February. I didn't do one in March, and I just missed you. So I'm doing a free coach week next week. It's going to be next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Let me get the dates for that. Okay, so it's April 1st through the 3rd, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. I am doing Coach Week. For those of you guys who are new, who don't know what Coach Week is, this is just free coaching. So this is a week where you get to come, you get to listen to other people get coached. If you're not comfortable doing it yourself, this is where you can bring me whatever it is that you're struggling with, and I'm going to help you through it. So I will put the link to this in the show notes so that you can sign up for it, or you can go to my website, jolenewind.com/Coach Week, and you will be able to sign up for that. If you go to my website, jolenewind.com, go to the Coach Week tab, it'll have all the details. You can sign up for free, and then I will be able to help you with this, and you can come spend some time. That would be so fun. Okay, and the last calendar event is that in April, the month of April, I believe April 22nd through the 24th, I am doing a resentment masterclass. And resentment has been a struggle for so many of you, and it's been coming up a lot recently with my clients, with my podcast listeners, with people who follow me on Instagram and message me. And so I'm creating a masterclass on how to extinguish resentment. And that's going to be at the end of April. And that is inside my coaching program. So if that is something that you guys want help with, then if you come join my program, then you'll be able to join us for that class, and I can help you work through it. All right? All right, ladies, let's talk today about if you don't want to get your hopes up. This is absolutely something that I have seen over and over and over. It is very common. So if you are feeling like you don't want to get your hopes up and you're worried about it, worried about what that means, it doesn't mean anything, ladies. Don't worry. I'm going to dive into that today. But I also want you to know that you're not by yourself. This is very normal. I'm going to talk to you about why this happens so you get a better understanding of what's going on. And then I will tell you how to start working past it. Okay. Number one, I think, as we always start off, is what even is hope? If we're going to talk about how we don't want to get our hopes up, then let's talk about what that even means. Okay. What is hope? If you go to the dictionary, which I always do, then hope is a noun. Hope is a feeling. Okay. It's even on here. Okay. Hope is a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. Okay. So it's a feeling of expectation and desire, right? It's okay, I expect this thing to happen, or I want this thing to happen. I have a desire for this thing to happen. There's a certain outcome that I am hoping for. There's something that I want to happen. That's what I want. That's just a feeling. Now, here's what else is fascinating. The second definition is a feeling of trust. So this is so fascinating to notice, because most of the time when we think about hope, we don't actually think of it in terms of trust. And I want to gear your mind toward that today. When you are hoping for something, you are trusting, okay? It's a feeling of trust. Now, here's what I want to suggest. Most of the time, we feel like we can't hope for something that's not within our control, right? If, let's say, for example, your husband is struggling with a pornography problem, right? And you hope that eventually at some point he conquers it. It feels like what we are trusting in is him, right? And maybe that's part of it. Maybe the hope that we allow ourselves to have is trusting that our husband will eventually work on it. But what I want to offer is that even if we don't go there, I would offer that you trust yourself instead. Trust yourself to manage the emotions that come up for you. Trust yourself to know how to handle it even if it doesn't happen. Trust yourself to keep the hope, to allow yourself the hope, to increase your capacity to feel hope and give it to yourself as a gift, and trust that you know what to do even if that thing doesn't come to pass. Does that make sense? And of course, you can always trust in God. Trust that God has it under control, that he's never going to step in and take away people's choice. That's not what he does. He will always allow us to choose, but he also always creates a way. He always creates that contingency plan. He always is the one that's mastering everything that's going on, so that even if circumstances don't rearrange in a way that we prefer, he still gives us a way to make our way through them. Does that make sense? So that's the definition that I kind of want you guys to keep in mind as we're talking today. One is it's a feeling of trust, but also it's a feeling and a desire for a certain thing to happen, okay? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So one thing that I wanted to bring up is that even the title of this podcast episode, right, is if you don't want to get your hopes up. I want to even talk about that phrase. We talk about that phrase. Why do we call it hopes up? What is it about how are they going up, right? Here's what I want to talk about it. It's because hope is a positive emotion. Remember that definition? Hope is just a feeling, okay? Hope is a feeling that you feel, and it is a positive emotion, okay? So it feels lighter. It feels up. It's an up emotion. It's a higher level emotion. So that's why we say get our hopes up. So we say we don't want to get our hopes up, right? That's just meaning that normally we live our life at an emotional level 3. Maybe hope is an emotional level 7. We don't want to go up to a level 7, which is really just so fascinating, even if we think about this, because it's us lowering our emotional baseline. It's us lowering the level of positive emotion that we allow in our lives. If you guys are scared of getting your hopes up, then I want to offer, and I'm going to talk about this later, that you start to practice increasing your capacity to feel positive emotion. Most humans will subconsciously lower their emotional baseline. They will not allow themselves to feel positive emotion. And this is a little bit of a tangent. Maybe I need to do a whole nother podcast episode on this. But this is just one example of how we do that. It sounds crazy. It sounds like, okay, but wouldn't we want to feel better? Wouldn't we want to feel more positive emotion? Why would we bring ourselves down subconsciously? It sounds absurd. And yet this is such a clear example of one of the ways that we do it. We don't give ourselves permission to feel something positive, and I'm going to dive into why in just a minute, but we don't allow ourselves to feel that positive. We subconsciously bring ourselves down to where we are comfortable, to what is our norm. So whatever your normal emotional baseline level is, your brain will always recalibrate to bring yourself back to what that is. So if you're at typically an emotional level 1, okay, then what your brain will do is it will subconsciously rearrange and recalibrate always so it gets back to that homeostasis. Whatever it is that you're comfortable with, you might be comfortable with like a -9, okay? And maybe that's where your baseline is and that's what you're comfortable with, and then your brain will always bring you back down to that. I'm going to have to do another podcast on this another day, but this was just such a clear example to me of how our brain does that and how we don't even realize we do that to ourselves. But using these phrases like, I don't want to get my hopes up, means we're keeping ourselves at this certain level. We're not allowing ourselves to feel that positive emotion. So let's dive into why. Why don't we? Why don't we get our hopes up? Why don't we allow ourselves to feel positive emotion? Here's one of the reasons. When we're talking about hope specifically, why don't we choose it, right? If a feeling is created by our thoughts and we get to choose our thoughts, why aren't we choosing things that create hope? Number one, because we often think that allowing ourselves to hope is stupid or that we'll feel naive if the outcome that we are hoping for doesn't actually come to pass, right? It's like we want to hold out until we know that it's an okay thing to hope for, right? So when things are looking bad, let's just example, okay? So let's say you want to hope that your husband's going to get better and that he's someday going to conquer this addiction and he won't always relapse. Or maybe you're like, that's too far-fetched. Let's just hope for the fact that maybe one time it's like less bad than it is now, right? Or he goes longer between relapses, or that he reaches out to a friend, right? We may have whatever it is that you're hoping for that you see as the next step in his recovery. Okay, that hope right now, we often don't want to hope for it because we think that hoping for it means that we're naive or it means that we are stupid. And what I want to offer, ladies, is that's the furthest thing from the truth. Okay, being naive means you're sticking your head in the sand. Being naive means that you see the writing on the wall and you're just pretending that it doesn't exist. That's very different than hope. Hope is saying, I see everything clearly. And I'm still willing to I'm still willing to allow myself to desire a different outcome. Does that make sense? Because that's what hope is. It's a desire for a certain outcome. It's an expectation or desire for a certain outcome. It's just a feeling. And it is okay to allow yourself to desire something different. Okay? It's not because this one is, it's not because our husband is less worthy at where he is now, but it's because that's not exactly what we all hoped for. Let's be frank, right? If we were just like making a list of like, things we wanted in our marriage, I don't think any of us put this on here. And I think that's okay. All right. So I want you to notice that it's okay to allow yourself to have hope. But when the way that where it gets tricky here is when we hold the hope or use the hope against your husband. Does that make sense? That's where it gets tricky and where it becomes detrimental to your marriage, right? Rather than just having the hope and leaving the space that things could get better, because that's what hope is, right? It's creating a space where things could get better, where things could be different in the future. We're just going to leave that space open. When we have an expectation, like you have to change, then that's when we're kind of holding it against him. You guys see the difference? So hope kind of just creates an openness and a space for things to change in the future, especially when it's not something that's within our control. We're just creating the space for it to happen and being okay if it does, but then also being okay if it doesn't. Does that make sense? And that's really different than having to have things change or expecting our husband's behavior to change, okay? And again, feeling naive, one of the things we don't want to get our hopes up because we don't want to be naive. Naive is when you're just pretending that it's not a problem, and that's not what you're doing at all. Here, you're actually saying, yes, I know this is a problem, but I'm also willing to create the space for things to change in the future. And that is very different. That is not naive, okay? So continuing, right? So oftentimes what we want to do is we want to hold our hope hostage a little bit until we have evidence that things are looking better. Okay? Here's what I mean by this. It's like if your husband's in a really bad place, right? And if he's relapsing constantly, or he's not going to meetings, he's not going to therapy, he's not doing any of the work, he's not even interested in any of it, then that is when we typically will not allow ourselves to feel hope, because it feels very hopeless, right? Now, if he starts going to meetings, if he starts going to therapy, if it's been a while since he's relapsed, this is when it starts to feel a little safer to give yourself permission to feel hope. However, this is also when our brain says, well, I don't want to get my hopes up. And I'll talk about another reason why in just a minute. But notice how our brain wants to determine whether or not it's okay to have hope based on the circumstance changing. You guys follow me? So notice our brain, like I said, will hold our hope hostage. If things aren't going well, it won't allow yourself to feel hope. But if things start to go a little bit better, then it'll start to say, okay, maybe we could allow ourselves to get our hopes up, right? If things start to look good, we may be more likely to allow ourselves a little more hope in a positive or wanted outcome because it seems more likely to happen, okay? Now, I want you guys to notice that hope has actually nothing to do with whether or not the outcome we are hoping for comes to pass, right? It's not like hope is not directly correlated to the outcome we desire. Meaning, if we don't get what we hope for, it doesn't mean that hope was pointless. Hope is just the desire for a certain outcome. Now, whether or not that outcome comes to fruition or actually, magically gets created is irrelevant, because we're hoping for something possible. We're keeping the possibilities open. That's what hope is. It's not closing off. It's keeping things open. Okay? And it doesn't mean if the outcome you're hoping for doesn't actually come to pass, it doesn't mean that all of your hope was a waste of time. All that you did at the very worst, the worst thing that could happen, ladies, if you allow yourself to feel hope, is that you gave yourself permission to feel some positive emotion in a very difficult time. That's it. And it also gave you the opportunity. It means that you gave yourself the opportunity to see possibility and to create a space where there was the possibility of something better. And I don't know about you, but that's kind of how I want to see the world. I want to see the world with hope. I want to see the world not from a naive place. Again, not from a place of I'm just going to pretend like everything's beautiful, but from a place of I see exactly what's going on and I'm still going to hold the space that something could be better. Okay, that's what hope is. Okay, but again, our brain resists that. Even when things start to go more positively, then we'll say things like, well, I don't want to get my hopes up. And again, the reason that I'm harping on this so much, ladies, I don't know if I'm harping on it, but the reason that I'm hitting this so much is because so many of you think, well, I can't hope for it until he starts to change. I can't allow myself to feel hope. I can't give myself permission to feel hope unless I start to see some behavior changes on his part. Then I'll be able to have hope for the future. And what I want to show you guys is that it's completely irrelevant to what he's doing. Like I just showed you, right? oftentimes when he's not doing well, we'll say, okay, well, I can't have hope now because it seems so hopeless. But even if he starts to change, you will still hold hope hostage because hope is a choice that you get to make, just like trust, right? It's a decision. You get to decide to allow yourself hope. And again, our brain will bring it back down to that negative emotional baseline or that lower emotional baseline. You have to consciously give yourself permission to increase your ability and capacity to feel hope. It's not just going to happen all on its own, okay? So notice that it has nothing to do with your circumstances. If you want to give yourself permission to feel hope, you can, okay? Now, the second biggest reason, the second main reason why we don't like to get our hopes up is because our brain thinks that if we do, it will hurt worse if what we hope for doesn't happen, okay? I did a podcast episode a while ago about disappointment. This is very much where disappointment comes in, right? Because how do we feel when we hope for something and then it doesn't happen? We feel disappointed, right? And this is what I did. This is the example that I'm giving with these emotional baselines, right? This is simply not true, okay? So just pretend you live your life at an emotional level 2. And let's say hope is a level 6, okay? Then let's say that thing that you don't want to have happen, right? Let's say that thing that you're hoping for doesn't happen. Let's say you're hoping that your husband doesn't relapse and then he does. Well, then however you feel when he relapses, let's say that brings you down to a negative 2, okay? So we were at a 2, we went to a 6, we went down to a negative 2, okay? Either way, we're going to go down to a negative 2. We're going to feel disappointment, we're going to feel hurt, we're going to feel whatever it is that we feel, and it's going to bring us down to a negative 2. Okay, now, the reason that this feels lower if we get our hopes up is simply because of the difference between a positive hope level 6 and a negative 2. But the thing that happens if you don't allow yourself to feel hope is that you just go from a level 2 to a negative 2. The reason that doesn't feel as hard is simply because the difference between 2 and negative 2 is not as great as 6 and negative 2. But notice that you didn't actually make yourself feel any worse. Negative 2 is still negative 2, whether you get your hopes up or whether you don't. All you've done is not giving yourself permission to feel at a 6, to live your life at a 6 for a little bit, to hold that emotional baseline a little bit higher. That is the only thing that you have created. It doesn't make the negative 2 hurt any less. The negative 2 is still going to hurt, whether your husband relapses or whether he doesn't, whether your husband relapses, whether you allow yourself to hope or whether you don't, that your husband relapsing is going to hurt, okay? It's going to hurt. So anticipating it and refusing to allow yourself to feel hope doesn't make that hurt go away. Because as long as you're not okay with your husband watching porn, if he does, you're not going to be okay with it, which means you're going to have a negative emotional reaction to it, and that's totally fine. I am with you, okay? You don't have to change that thought. You can keep that response pattern. I am okay with that. But own it. And also don't use it as an excuse to not allow yourself positive emotion, okay? It feels like a bigger letdown if we start higher because the difference between point A and point B is greater, but not because we hit a lower low. Okay, you don't hit a lower low when you allow yourself to feel positive emotion. Here's one of the things that we try to do, and again, this goes back to our brain keeping this emotional baseline at the minimal possible, is that we will often, again, I was talking about that recalibration. Our brain will keep us at a certain point. Our brain will not allow ourselves to increase positive emotion. And so it will also, in our attempt, let me clarify this. You guys, my brain is not working. Okay, rethinking this. Okay, when our brain doesn't want to feel negative emotion, it will want to shut it off. But when we shut ourselves off to negative emotion, we can't just shut off the negative side. We unintentionally also shut off the positive side as well. We cannot only close ourselves off to negative emotion. You also close yourself off to positive. Okay? So the hardest thing to learn is to be in charge of your brain so that when your brain says, I don't want to feel negative emotion, let me close off to this, it starts to close off to positive as well. And what my clients learn, what I teach you guys, and what you're learning on this podcast is to start increasing your capacity for all emotion. And yes, when you increase your capacity to feel positive, you're going to increase your capacity to feel negative as well. That's a beautiful part of living. So increasing that capacity to feel negative emotion gives you permission to feel hope. You get both sides of the spectrum. Our brain is so afraid of negative emotion that it thinks if we increase our capacity to feel, that we'll only get more negative. But that's not true. We will also get more positive if we give ourselves permission to feel it. Okay? Now, notice if you want to choose hope, if you're like, all right, I am tired of feeling hopeless and I want to choose hope, and now we know why it's not happening, that's the first step, okay? This is the steps that I teach over and over in my program, okay? Awareness. First thing that you have to do if you want to feel more hopeful, if you want to choose hope, if you're like, yeah, that actually sounds great, the first thing to notice is why you aren't, okay? Maybe it's one of those two big reasons that I talked about. Maybe it's that you don't want to feel stupid or naive, or maybe it's because your brain says that it'll hurt worse if we get our hopes up. Those are the two main reasons that I see, right? So number one, just become aware of why you aren't. Just ask yourself, why do I not want to get my hopes up? And that's all you need to ask yourself to come up with the answer, okay? Process that emotion. Okay, so maybe what the answer that comes up is, well, I don't want to feel stupid. I don't want to feel naive. I don't want to get my hopes up because it'll hurt worse if what I hope for doesn't actually happen. Whatever the answer is, it's going to come up. It's going to bring up an emotion. Process that emotion. Okay, step number one, awareness. Step number two, acceptance. It's okay that you see it. It's okay that this is your thought. It doesn't mean anything. Step number three, process your emotion. Step number four, then we get to choose a new thought. We get to decide how we want to think about this. Okay, it's like, all right, so maybe the thought that I have is that I don't want to feel more disappointed if what I hope for doesn't happen. Okay, I can just accept that. It doesn't mean anything. I can process the emotion that comes up with it. Maybe it's a fear. And then I get to decide on purpose, is this something that I actually want to keep thinking? And if not, I get to choose a new thought. Maybe the new thought is, all right, maybe I will get my hopes up. What if I do allow myself to get my hopes up and I just become okay that I might feel disappointed? And that's it. Maybe that's the new thought. Step number five, and then you just rinse and repeat. Okay, so step number four is choose a new thought. Step number five, retrain your brain. Okay, retraining your brain looks like doing this process over and over and over and over. Recognizing the thoughts that come up, recognizing the resistance that comes up, processing the emotion that comes up with it, and then purposefully redirecting your brain to create new neural pathways so that the pattern of your brain doesn't immediately go to hopelessness. It actually gives yourself permission to hope. We're talking about increasing your capacity to feel hope. That's what this is all about, and this is how you do it. If you want to choose hope, you can. Step number one, become aware of why you aren't. Why don't you want to get your hopes up? Answer that question. Step number two, just accept whatever answer comes up. No self-judgment. It doesn't mean anything about you or your husband or your future. All it is just a thought. We're just going to accept it without self-judgment. Step number three, we're going to process the emotion that comes up. Step number four, we get to decide on a new thought. Step number five, retrain your brain over and over and over. It is a very simple process. Is it easy? No. But is it simple? Yes. Okay? So you just do that over and over and over. Now, here's what I wanted to end with, because this is the connection to Easter, okay? And Palm Sunday, like I said, all of this idea about hope, this is something that I've just been thinking about all week, with this week being Holy Week and everything coming up, Palm Sunday and Easter. Yesterday was Palm Sunday, and this coming week is Easter. I want you to think about what you have hope in. Who do you trust in? Think about those definitions of hope. It's a feeling of expectation, a desire for a certain thing to happen. It's a feeling of trust. So I want to offer that when you find yourself struggling with hope, then I want you to ask yourself, who am I trusting in right now? And maybe you're not trusting your husband. Maybe you're not even trusting yourself, but you can always trust God. The thing that I was thinking about most this week was thinking about those few days where Jesus was in the tomb. There is not a situation that is more hopeless than those days at that time. Think about it. We read the story of Jesus knowing that at the end he resurrected, knowing that he conquered death, knowing that he lived again. They didn't have that. Friday came and their Savior was crucified and he died and they buried him. And then they waited. from Friday night, that probably was a sleepless night, all through Saturday, which was their Sabbath. I can't imagine a Sabbath more emotionally despairing than that Sabbath. Kind of numb even. I just imagine these people going through the motions, probably not really eating, probably just going through the motions of their religion. I mean, I know I've gone to church at times where I have been so emotionally overwhelmed that I'm not even hearing the words that are being said in the sermon. I'm not hearing it. I'm not feeling God, and I'm just there. And that's kind of what I imagine. And I don't know what their experience is like, but I know what that was like. You just kind of feel hollow and empty and sad, but to the nth degree. And that's what I imagine they felt like. I imagine they just felt hopeless. But after the longest, 36 hours of their lives, they came to the tomb. And I don't know which one of them, if any of them, really understood what Jesus told when he was on the earth, when he was talking about how he was going to come again. I don't think they understood it, because Mary came to the grave and she thought that Jesus was the gardener until he spoke her name and he said, Mary, and she turned around and she saw him. Can you imagine how she felt? And then after she told the disciples, after she told Peter, James, and John, and they ran to the tomb, do you think they allowed themselves to feel hope in that moment on that run, that race to the tomb to see if what she was saying was true? Maybe some of them allowed themselves to hope, and we know that they did, because we then have the contrast of doubting Thomas, right? We have the contrast of Thomas, who was doubtful, who didn't want to get his hopes up, right? That's what he said. He's like, it's too painful to get my hopes up. I don't want to hope in something that then doesn't have to happen, because that would be so disappointing. But what if you did allow yourselves to get your hopes up, ladies? Hope is a beautiful emotion, and all it means is that you're creating space for something more positive. You are creating space in yourself to believe in a better outcome. And that is a beautiful gift to give yourself. So this Easter, I want you guys to practice hope. Practice a feeling of trust in God. Practice a feeling of thinking that things could be different, a desire for things to be different. And I know that that's even hard to get to. Sometimes our lives and our circumstances are so difficult and so emotionally straining that it feels almost impossible to even want things to change. But I promise you guys, as you start to practice increasing your capacity for hope, it gets easier. And it doesn't mean that the disappointment gets any more disappointing. And it doesn't mean that what you hope for, even if it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that your hope was in vain. There is no such thing as false hope. There's no such thing as having hope in vain. Hope is the desire and the trust that things could be better. And I have a testimony that because of God, it always will be. Ladies, I love you so much. I hope you have a beautiful week. And I'll talk to you guys next week on a brand new episode. So take care. All right, ladies, it's time to rise up and take charge of your healing, and I have the best way for you to do it. I have created a lifetime access coaching program that I have designed specifically for you and exactly what you're going through right now. This is where I help you develop a personal mastery of all the tools that you're learning here on the podcast in order for you to create a permanent change. Go to my website, joleneWynn.com. You will find all the information there, and you can sign up today. And we will start going forward. I can't wait to see you there.